Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to continue our expectations series. I promise you we're nearing the end of this, but this has been a lot of fun talking about two players, one from the offense, one from the defense each episode. Here to join me to talk about two important players for the 2023 Ravens is Jordan Coe. Jordan, how you doing?
Good, Ken. Thanks for having me on again.
Always a pleasure, my friend. So we're going to talk today about Patrick Mekari and Tyus Bowser. Who do you want to start with, Mekari or Bowser?
Let's start with Tyus Bowser. I think he's a really interesting guy from my perspective for this upcoming year. The Ravens are, it seems like, going to be leaning on him pretty hard at that outside linebacker position on one side of the field. They've got an interesting combination in OA and Ajabo, but it seems as though, at least the way they're signaling it with what they're doing at the outside linebacker position in terms of veterans that they've added, they're going to be looking pretty heavily from a contribution from Bowser.
Well, let's hope that works out. Of course, Bowser, the NFI designation just tagged with him. As far as I know, that hasn't been lifted yet. There's been a fair amount of these one-day designations that have been going around the league lately, including Bateman did not report into a PUP. But Bowser has an NFI designation for something that happened to his knee, apparently. So away from the facility. I guess they just don't have an explanation for exactly what is wrong at this point. We're hoping, obviously, it turns out to be not a particularly serious injury. He is one of the most important Ravens in terms of his role, being that Sam linebacker. One of the interesting things is the fact that the Ravens brought in Kyle Van Noy for a visit on Friday that seemed to mesh, honestly, pretty closely with the news on Bowser. So that has me a little bit concerned about how serious is the term associated with Bowser's injury. And last year, of course, Bowser missed the first 8 weeks. It really hurt the Ravens in a number of ways. We'll get into a little bit of that. And he returned right at the same time as Roquan Smith did for that Week 9 game in New Orleans. And all of a sudden, the Ravens defense was an entirely different animal.
Yeah, it really was. And, if you look at what the Ravens did, and Melvin Gordon is, I think, much to do about nothing in the bigger picture. But I think that when you think about Van Noy coming in, even with the designation with Bowser, the lack of signing of Van Noy, hopefully, if we're trying to read tea leaves here, and I know nothing about the status of Bowser's actual health, I think that if it was something more serious, I think he would have already been on board, or somebody, or a Justin Houston, or somebody else that is a veteran that's out there. And there are a number of them that are veteran outside linebackers are out there that would kind of either been in for a visit or likely already been on the books.
Well, let's come back to that, because the Sam linebacker, very tricky to actually find one. Most of the guys out there, particularly the older guys, tend to be rush linebackers. But let's talk a little bit about Bowser in terms of who he is at this point in his career. He's a 6-year player. I think this will be his 7th season, right? 2018. Oh, I have to look at it. It's just one of those things. Yes, he played 6 years already. This is his 7th season. He turned 28 in May. We talked a little bit about last year and what happened. Obviously, the whole story is not Bowser himself. The primary part of the story is what happened to Odafe and how short on total outside linebackers the Ravens were. And Odafe last year, when Bowser was out, had to move over and play a fair amount of Sam linebacker. They used Malik Harrison there on some early down snaps. They had Justin Houston. They brought in JPP later in the season to kind of split some time with Bowser as well on the strong side. But Owe was really the most affected player by the absence of Bowser, because while he has the athletic traits to play that position, he was, one, playing out of position, so not really working on his pass rush as much as he should. And two, he was playing way too many snaps because of the absence of total outside linebackers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and, even with a healthy Bowser, there's got to be another guy. And this is why a guy like Van Noy is probably getting a look. There's got to be somebody else that's going to be getting some kind of action in some form or another from this Ravens team out of that spot. Bowser, obviously a huge alleviation of what that looks like for this team. His versatility, his ability to do everything on the field when they kind of needed him to. When you look at his 21 season with the 7 sacks, his ability to kind of bring that to the table just makes it a little bit easier on everybody. But, there's got to be some assumption that, Bowser is still a very good third down outside linebacker. So even though he gives you that Sam versatility, in first and second and more diverse set of downs, he's still a good pass rusher. And so it is not, I don't think we're looking at a situation where he's coming off the field for an Ajabo or an Owe in pass rushing situations alone either, which means that we're going to continue to see Owe, I think, probably pick up at least some of those snaps.
I mean, I would agree for starters. I think Bowser stays on the field on third down, but I've made the point that the thing he brings the Ravens pass rush is a lot of flexibility on who they bring. So if Bowser can drop the cover and take the responsibility of the slot corner in terms of a shallow zone, or do any number of other things to hit a guy off the line of scrimmage, disrupt a route, whatever it might be, or just read the quarterback better than any outside linebacker in the game, it allows McDonald tremendous flexibility in planning that pass rush for other players that the quarterback or the offensive line may not see coming, that will cause additional confusion. The way the Ravens like to blitz, in particular from inside linebacker and off the slot, safety as well, all of those are possibilities in terms of how Tyus Bowser can help the flexibility of your coverage team to generate more pass rush. And I don't think the Ravens are getting that when they had Owe on that side. In fact, Owe didn't drop that much. But if you look at Tyus Bowser, last year in half a season, he dropped 61 times. In 2021, Tyus Bowser dropped 218 times into coverage on the season. He only rushed the passer 338 times, by the way. So, 40% of the time he's rushing, he's dropping a cover.
Yeah, those are, I mean, even just thinking about that from his sack numbers for the amount of times he rushed, that's impressive. I think the flip side of that is also impressive. And he's always, I thought after year 2, he really evolved. And in year 3 and 4, we really started to see a much better cover linebacker, not a guy that was kind of playing his zone, but more playing in the defense and real improvement. I also think, I did the inside linebacker show. We did the inside linebacker preview show for the draft. And I think we it felt like it might've been a little quicker because we didn't think the Ravens were going to make serious consideration at inside linebacker. And then in the third round, when Trenton Simpson was still there, a guy that we both liked, I think we both had him in our kind of top 2 or top 3 of guys that we would have been interested in the Ravens taking. He's a guy that also in the Sam capacity or kind of versatility could definitely have a role. I mean, he obviously was a good pass rusher at Clemson as well. But his ability to kind of be able to do more than one thing does make it interesting. Also the ability to let, Patrick Queen as a guy that is kind of roaming along the line of scrimmage and is effective as a blitzer when teams don't really know where he's coming from, and those 3 guys in combination potentially. I mean, it's not an open and shut case that there's nobody else that can play Sam, but it will be very interesting to see what direction the Ravens take there on defense. And I think that won't be revealed to us until week 1. I don't think there's very little that we will see in practice or preseason that's going to be truly indicative of anything honest.
Right. I agree with that. I agree. We will definitely not see it in the preseason games. And I would agree. We'll have to wait for week 1 to see exactly what McDonald pulls out of the hat. But, Simpson is an interesting choice as either a backup or an early season replacement for Bowser, depending on the significance of this injury here. If he were to, he's an ex-safety. Definitely brings with him some, although in my opinion, not quite as much as you would like, of understanding of what's happening behind him that he brings up from playing safety previously. And he's done some other things. He's tried to cover the slot, usually probably a tight end or a bigger guy, certainly can cover a running back on a wheel route. That's a well within his range of capabilities. But he's more of a pass rusher in the mold of Patrick Queen, that I think he gives you a guy who can rush from off the line of scrimmage in a pick your gap or find your spot basis, where he might come free because there's confusion because of a delay that he can set up and use good timing, or he might be able to cross splits with somebody else, or he might be able to take advantage of a double team or across the face of the guard that's been done by an under player. I'm not saying he can't directly rush straight up against a tackle. I just think he's pretty darn undersized to do that on anything but an occasional basis.
Yeah, well, and looking at him more in snaps where he might need to drop, they good numbers from him at Clemson in 22 there. I think there were I saw this recently, like maybe 14 or 15 attempts against him, and I think only 2 or 3 completions. So when he was dropping, and then huge versatility from what he was doing at Clemson. I think it was over 200 snaps at inside linebacker and over 200 snaps at outside linebacker. So a lot of diversity from him in terms of what he was bringing to the team when he was there.
Yeah, he was good. I seem to remember his it's maybe a career number or a last year number, but he was at something like 5.4 yards per carry, which is good. 5.4 yards per target, I should say, but it wasn't quite as good as I thought it would be. So I got to see if on it for just a second here. So last year he gave up. He had 36 targets for 196 yards against him, which isn't bad. That's under 6 yards a target. 5.4. Yeah, that's what I thought I remembered. And then for his career, looks like, yeah, really good. 406 yards on 73 targets. So that's good as well. 5.6 yards per target. So definitely it's good for a linebacker, no doubt about it. They tend to be the guys who make the NFL, the guys who are drafted tend to be a little bit better, perhaps because they make a lot of downhill plays, a lot of plays in the backfield, but that's still quite good. And if he could retain that sort of effectiveness, that would be terrific at the NFL level. And if he could replace what Bowser does, I just don't know exactly how he does that from the line of scrimmage, then that'd be terrific. But right now we're talking about this, and all hands are on deck. Tyus Bowser, if he misses part of the season, that's an enormous piece missing for the Ravens, and they really need to figure out how to do it. And there may not be any one answer. There wasn't last year.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think the bottom line here, and we spend more time there talking about Simpson and Bowser. The bottom line is that Bowser's a really critical component to what the Ravens are looking for. I think the Ravens have a handful of guys that are intriguingly, I think, a bit underrated from kind of the broader league perspective of what they bring to their position. So, Marlon Humphrey probably is given the most accolades. And then you still see him, he was in like the top 85 or 90 of a recent top 100 list, which is ridiculous. But I think you see certain guys on the Ravens that do a lot of things for the way this defense is built. They're not going to be, they're not going to be a premier top shelf, Aaron Donald type name. But the contributions that a guy like Tyus Bowser is going to bring to this defense is going to make a significant impact by the end of the season. Yeah. Whether it is from not playing at all or playing.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. He's an impact player. And, Tyus Bowser contract is a hell of a good one. I think he's got 2 years still under contract, and the AAV on that contract is going to end up being a tremendous bargain for the Ravens if he can get his playing time in these next couple of years. I did want to remind people there were 10 guys who played outside linebacker for the Ravens last year. How many can you name? And I'm not trying to embarrass you because there's some really oddball names on this list you're probably not going to get. But of the 10 guys, how many can you actually name?
Oh, let's see. Well, so you've got Bowser, JPP that we've named, OA, Ajabo took snaps, Malik Harrison, which was ugly. Oh, you're definitely putting me on the spot here. I mean, I guess did they have Phillips play in any of those outside linebacker spots? Did he end up sliding out at all?
He had one snap defensively where he fell on the quarterback, so he's rushing the quarterback. I left him at inside linebacker. He's not one of my 10, but he probably would be the 11th if you wanted to call it that. But I have him listed at inside linebacker.
I mean, are we talking about Patrick Queen sliding over as?
No, these are other guys, no doubt about it. Outside linebackers. They just none of them were here for very long. Say again?
Steve Means was there for what? A game, right? Steve Means
1 game plus 1 snap.
And then okay, so I've got 6.
There's one big one you haven't named that played a lot of snaps.
A big one that I forget who I named now.
Okay,
Go ahead and tell me the other four.
Okay, sure. Okay, well, Houston was the big one. I'm sure you would have gotten him if you'd been thinking about it. But then,
I thought I said Houston. Sorry. Yeah.
No problem. No problem. So anyway, the other three are Ada Ochu, who I've even forgotten what his first name was, but Copeland, the Gilman guy who was back here briefly, obviously last year, and Kennard. And you actually got Stephen Means, which was one of the really hard ones. So, and Phillips, I got to give you credit probably for that too, for extra credit for that. So, there was just a lot of guys floating through there, and it was a lack of people who could stay on the field at all those first 2 weeks. And what it meant was tremendous overuse of the couple of guys who were there. Remember, Jabo wasn't there early in the year, and Bowser wasn't either. So Owe was playing a ton of snaps. Houston was completely overworked, and Jason Pierre-Paul was not there yet. And so I think,
early in the season it was rough early.
It was utterly miserable, and it's not like the arrival of Roquan wasn't like a seminal moment, but it was made extra seminal by the fact that Bowser returned at that exact same time, and that really changes the flexibility of the defense and the flexibility to rush the passer. So, and Owe, of course, moved back over to that his natural side of the field. So we've been hearing a lot about this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, Means had that one big preseason game, if I recall, and looked solid in the one game. That's why I, was able to recall him. It felt like the Ravens, weren't relying on him, but he did seem to be right there at their kind of top of the list pre-injury of what they were hoping they were going to get a fill in for.
Yeah, and honestly, from the first game against the Jets, he played quite well, I thought, and I thought he would be fine to be one of the outside linebackers for a while. That they would get through with him, and he might even have stayed on the team. If they'd have, maybe they don't pick up JPP if Stephen Means stays healthy and is still around. But JPP ended up being a really good find, and he took a lot of early down Sam snaps, some from Harrison. He took some rush snaps. He kicked inside. He ended up being very flexible for the Ravens in terms of what he provided them. And let's see, he had the second most snaps of all the outside linebackers last year. So the order, this would be another tough question, but Bowser had 657, Pierre-Paul 553, Houston 418, Bowser 387. And then after that, everybody else has got less than 100 snaps. Although Harrison might have had over 100 outside linebacker too. So anyway, it's an
interesting mix. JPP was definitely not a guy that I don't think we got a great performance from him, but like you said, they needed him, and he set the edge more effectively than I thought he was going to when the Ravens brought him in.
Yeah, I thought he did some nice things. Batted a couple passes, and he definitely did some positive things. He wasn't the pass rusher he used to be, but we kind of knew that was probably a limited opportunity there. One thing you do hear people talking about consistently on Twitter is people saying, why don't we sign Justin Houston because we don't have enough outside linebackers? And I think the issue right now for the Ravens is probably one of fit, is that they've got the rush linebackers they need. In fact, because they didn't have Ajabo at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, they only had Owe. Maybe they needed a rush linebacker then, but now they've got Owe, Ajabo, and the newly drafted Tavius Robinson for the rush side. And they have Bowser only with an NFI designation on the Sam side. And that's the next guy they sign better be a Sam, is all I can say. So.
Well, I don't expect to see, I wouldn't expect to see a lot of Tavius Robinson. I'd be surprised in a positive way. I think that would be, if that ends up being something that we see, that either means if Owe needs to be playing more Sam, he's doing it effectively, and the Tavius Robinson has been playing effectively or developed effectively as well.
So I don't disagree with that statement in general. I think that we're going to see some deactivations from Tavius Robinson, but I think we chew on this a little bit because Tyus Bowser's in absence really affects the Ravens, ripples through a lot of the defense.
Yeah.
So Calais Campbell is gone. So the defensive line obviously is going to get taxed with having to deal with all the additional Calais Campbell snaps to be distributed amongst the rest of them, including another player who is joining the team. in all likelihood. Okay. But will, obviously it means a higher snap percentage load for everyone. Then I'm going to compound that factor because the Monken offense is probably going to be faster paced, and they're going to be totally more offensive snaps and more defensive snaps because of that. More possession exchanges in total. And you can count on playing more defensive snaps if you're going to do that. In fact, that's one of the real risks of the Monken offense, is that it might be too fast paced for a defense that's very thin at several positions, specifically cornerback, and I would say defensive line and outside linebacker I'm looking at now.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that the other day and wondering whether or not whether Monken's offense is simultaneously going to lead to Ricard playing less at fullback, and whether or not we see him playing any on the defensive line if the Ravens don't make an addition on the interior of the defensive line at all, and whether or not that's something they consider, especially if it's a significant decrease in snaps for him.
Yeah, that is a possibility. That's a possibility on an emergency basis at the very least. At the very least. So if they have someone go down in a game,
at the minimum, because he's going to be active.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. So that may actually really help the Ravens if they need somebody to take 20% of the snaps in a couple games. Ricard could be that guy. I don't think he's ever going to be a really heavy workload guy again, but emergencies are emergencies, and you can make somebody take a lot of snaps in one game. If you absolutely
6 to 8
need
snaps,
it,
6 to 8 could go a long way in kind of alleviation and on the spot duties. And it's not something I think that the Ravens will be actively game planning how to get Pat Ricard onto the field as a defensive lineman. But his ability to be able to fill in there does seem like it matters a little bit.
Okay, so now I started this comment by saying that Tyus Bowser's problem was going to ripple into the defensive line, and here's how. They have all those additional snaps they need to fill. Well, one way to fill defensive line snaps is to kick in pass rushers on third down. So you get Tavius Robinson on the field. You get Ajabo on the field as an interior rusher instead of rushing from the edge. So the old race car package. You've got 4 outside linebackers on the field on an obvious passing down, then that alleviates a lot of your need for rotational defensive line depth. So if you can do that, if you have the players to do it, so one way, if you're going to activate 5 defensive linemen or even 4 in some games, and you're a little concerned about it, even though you're going to face mostly 11 personnel, which would only have 2 on the field at a time. If you're a little bit concerned about it, one of the things you can go back to is to say, well, most of these passing downs, we're going to be playing 3 defensive linemen we'll be playing 3 outside linebackers and only 1 defensive lineman. And so sometimes, and this was true in 2019, they got their defensive linemen per snap down under 1.8. So that's very low. And if you think about that, that means all of the percentages of snaps played by your defensive line need to sum to 1.8 or less. That's much more manageable than 2.2. It actually makes an enormous difference, even though maybe it doesn't seem like that big a difference, just listening here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and we saw big strides from Broderick Washington in particular on the defensive line. So there, I think that there are some opportunities. Travis Jones also on tape had some fantastic snaps. Yeah. So those 2 guys, their ability to fill in some of that, but yeah, I think we're going to see some extra rotations, et cetera. So there's going to be an addition, and I was kind of vaguely making this point as it related to Van Noy. I think the Ravens will know a lot more in a couple, let's say 10 days, even probably surrounding what Bowser's long-term injury perspective looks like. If they bring in a Sam guy within that period of time, I think our hackles should be much more alert for Bowser being in a more significant situation.
Yeah, hair on the back of our neck will definitely be raised if that's the case. I agree. I did want to mention one other thing before we move on this. The defensive line situation already, Matabike is a guy I think who has to play less snaps. He played 59% last year. He wasn't really effective in games where he had a lot of snaps, and he also wore down in the second half some. And sure, I mean, there's probably conditioning things that could improve that, and he's just kind of building up, kind of like an innings limit with pitchers. You're building up to ultimate snap count, but I think he'd be much more effective in the high 40s than in the high 50s. And so, that's a percentage of snaps and a, not insignificant total of snaps. You got to find somebody else to play. So I hope that they'll do that and make him much more of a pure pass rusher. Some of that may mean Travis Jones is a 3-tech on the early downs playing next to Pierce instead of in place of Pierce at nose tackle. All right.
Yeah. Well, we get Michael Pierce back. So that's, sorry. Yeah. Just the last addition there is that Michael Pierce is back. So hopefully healthy, obviously being key, but improvements from Jones and Washington plus Michael Pierce, hopefully that can weather any storm if there's additional wear and tear or needs on that defensive line.
Yeah. It's Michael Pierce is a huge piece and he hasn't been able to stay on the field. So let's hope. The Ravens have so many players that are in the they can't get injured camp. It's not a very safe spot, but Bowser is one of them, and Pierce is another, and Stanley and Humphrey and Lamar. All 5 of those players, I almost feel like it would be easier to lose, say, Mark Andrews than any of those 5 players, and that's sacrilege. But that's pretty much where I am right now. In terms of, if you're going to, you don't want to lose Andrews for a whole season, obviously, but if you lost him for 5 games, maybe you could make do with that. Whereas, it's not clear to me how the Ravens are gonna work around not having Tyus Bowser at present.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Couple things about Bowser last year. Didn't really set the edge, I didn't think, as well as he had in previous years. Now, I blame it probably on returning from the injury more than anything, because something else showed up is that he dropped to cover less frequently as a percentage of pass snaps last year, 25.7%, as opposed to 39.2% in 2021. So he's only rushing the passer a little bit less than dropping to cover a little bit less than 2/3 as often. Some of that might have been the change in coordinator doing more straight pass rushes of Bowser, but I think some of it is also the injury and that he probably wasn't as effective as he was in 21 when he had the 3 picks.
Yeah, hopefully, some of that is just injury related. And I think that it, especially coming back from an injury where part of your anchor and your feet and your legs are affected by that's definitely going to play a bigger part in your ability to set the edge. It was something that Bowser was so effective at before that I don't, I'm not surprised to hear that he struggled a bit more, or it would have appeared to last year. But I'm not particularly concerned that I would be that's a carryover issue. Obviously, something to keep an eye on, but that it's a carryover issue as we head into this year.
Right. So we talked about the need to find another Sam and just up front in the show, but one of the possibilities is one of the problems is that it's very hard to identify those guys. If they're not already playing it in a Sam heavy system that really relies on the Sam to drop, if you're stealing it from New England, well, that's fine. And that's kind of what Kyle Van Noy is. He played a couple of years in New England. I don't know how many, in addition to his years with the Chargers. So he's a guy who, is well versed in the system where he would drop to cover a lot. And if you're looking at the college ranks and trying to pick an R or 1 guy who was a Sam linebacker in college, good luck, because all those guys pretty much were pass rushers in college. They don't drop to cover very often. The complexity of that is something that I think most college defensive coordinators, if they have their pro prospect, they want to use him as a pass rusher, not to drop to coverage. So it just is something it's very hard to identify unless you're just doing straight trait-based scouting. And then you're still taking a risk because somebody's got to actually learn those techniques at the NFL level.
Yeah. And it doesn't look like, looking at the Ravens, who the Ravens brought in, they weren't targeting to try and do that. And like you said, once you get to the undrafted level or whoever's left over, it's just super unlikely that you're gonna strike gold there. So it will be really interesting to see if that leads to kind of a shift in what the Ravens try and do in their approach, what we get from McDonald's defense. But also with hopefully, knock on wood, right, a healthier secondary at the safety position for the balance of the season also, potentially can let you do more behind it. So maybe it lets McDonald change some things in the front seven if that's what he feels like he needs to do.
Yeah, I mean that would certainly be nice. Having they've got 3 safeties now. They don't have 4 with Clark. And who is their 4th safety even right now on the team? Oh, it's Brandon Stevens rather.
Yeah.
So
they do it. And Geno Stone.
Yeah. So Stone has been good at the position. In fact, been good as a free safety replacement for Marcus. But Brandon Stevens is still moving around, and they're intent on ruining him by not getting him a single position. Is what I always say. It's not even funny. It really isn't because of all the players it's happened to with the Ravens. But Brandon Stevens, who they could really use at outside corner, or even slot corner, is a guy who they're moving back to safety. And maybe this means they're trying to draw on Hamilton again to come up to slot corner. I actually don't think that's the way it's going to end up this year. But if it wouldn't surprise me if push comes to shove, and it always does with injuries, that Hamilton is forced up into that slot corner role again, even though that's not where the Ravens want to put him.
Well, I think both Hamilton and Marlon Humphrey draw the curse of having to cover in the slot position when the Ravens need them to. But both of them have been effective at it. I don't know that I think the players get ruined by their inability to stay in one place. I think that if they were better in one place, then we're still talking about cusp, guys in terms of what we saw from them. And if they were good enough to stay in one or the other spots, they were given. Stevens has had enough time both at safety and at corner to show that he is good enough to be an NFL level either one of those. And so I think he's definitely the last safety and maybe low on the corner list, but apparently by the Ravens evaluations if needed. But I don't know that I'd say that he's been ruined by getting moved around.
I mean, it's fair. We've kind of talked about this a fair amount on these expectation series, that it's the marginal players. It's the Camelot Correa, the Michael Orr, who was never particularly good, although he's good at right tackle in his first year, but his career was a ski slope from there in terms of moving around from position to position. And Brandon Stevens be another example. There's others that come to mind, but the 3 of them are a good starting point. It's not Adilus Thomas. He didn't have trouble moving around because he's a superstar athlete, and it's not Marshall Yanda, and it's not even Jarrett Johnson, who might have been somewhere in the middle as a player, but was a student of the game and could change positions relatively easily and change, frankly, his body type from what he came into the league to being a different body type necessary to play outside linebacker and then inside linebacker.
Yeah. I mean, well,
right,
Dallas Thomas is, as you said, unique guy.
Yes. And Marshall Yanda would be another one. I don't know if I mentioned him or not, but obviously he moved to left guard, right tackle, wherever you needed him. He probably was he probably was the best answer. It's just he's like the ace of spades. You can only play him once, and ace of trump, whatever. All right, let's talk about a good season, a great season for Tyus Bowser. So the way we've been doing this is you give me your good season, I'll tell you mine, and then we'll go to great and great.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think when I think about Bowser, it revolves around the 2 things that we were talking about, which are the number of snaps that he ultimately is able to take, and then sacks and interceptions, and I view those kind of in I guess I would view pressures as separate, but like sacks and interceptions as like the high impact splash plays, right? Pressures as in Bowser being a guy that's being able to make those expectations. So, I mean, I think a good season is one that we see a combination of 6+ sacks and interceptions that we're getting from Bowser overall, like on top of another 18 to 20+ pressures in a baseline of probably somewhere around, let's say in a good season, well, obviously kind of like metered out accordingly. So if it's a few less snaps or a few more snaps, you could see a little bit of variability there. But I think we're going to want to see, you're going to need to see 400, 300, 350 snaps from Bowser for it to be a season where we would be able to say good. Anything less than that, I think, is going to be a challenge for the Ravens defense, like we talked about, and a challenge to say that Bowser had a good year.
Okay, very good. I think I'm with you in line on the number of snaps here, pretty much, because Bowser played 387 last year, and I think he was active for about 9 weeks. So this we're right in the right ballpark. I said my good season is he returns to play 10 plus games, and I'm trying to deal with up to date information. So as of right now, we know Tyus Bowser's on the NFI list. That's not a good starting point, and that's why I'm saying a good season already as he plays 10 plus games. Before camp started, no way would that have been in there at all. It would have been a much higher figure that I'd been looking for. I want his coverage to return to near the top of the outside linebackers in the league. Doesn't have to be at the very top anymore. I know he's a year older. I know there's other guys coming into the league, but I still want him near the top of the outside linebackers as he has been for several years. I wanted to provide some complementary pass rush pressure and some second man finishes. I'm not expecting a bunch of one-on-one wins, and in particular in terms of a good season. That's not part of what I want. So I didn't have any straight numeric things other than the 10 plus games. And I think your snap total is right on the money pretty much. 350 plus, 350 being about the minimum to provide that pass rush flexibility for the rest of the group.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a higher expectation on his pass rush ability. You know, I want to see I think he's a really underrated pass rusher. And it's been kind of often overlooked and the Ravens have always seemed to have a guy like Houston or, Suggs during the earlier part of his career, a guy that was a more impact pass rusher. But I do think the Bowser, I think I have a bit of a higher baseline there than just wanting to see some cleanup.
Okay. Well, fair enough. How about your great season? What does it look like?
So, I think a great season goes back to on the sacks numbers where you're looking at 7+ sacks that we're getting from Bowser, that you get kind of that primary lead role from a sack leadership perspective. For me, then getting back into the top echelon of that pass defender kind of guy, 2 to 3 interceptions in addition to those sacks that we're seeing, and impact plays in that regard. And then, ideally getting to that like 13, 14 plus game range. So we're looking at 450, 500, 525 plus snaps, and being that anchor, like allowing it's almost as though the numbers from the rest of the guys from the Ravens are attributed in some way to Bowser by allowing the Ravens to do what they need to do with the other outside linebacker positions, to rotate those guys, to allow Owe to stay in his role. If Bowser's playing 550 snaps this year, I think that's by virtue of that, one of Ajabo or Owe is probably going to have a really nice year on the stat sheet. And if he has that 350 number, one of them still could do it, but then it's going to be a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I could completely agree. I think your reasoning is excellent there. I'll just read mine quickly. I say plays 14 plus games, effectively duplicates per snap productivity from his fine 2021 season. So that would get at some of the interceptions, but just generally some of the coverage effectiveness is what I want. Improves on his career 16% missed tackle rate to finish under 12%. He and a backup of that, as yet we do not know, allow Ajabo and Owe to play almost the entire season at rush linebacker. And I'm with you. I think those guys and Chuck Smith, and maybe Bowser can learn from him too, but those two in particular have a ton to gain from Chuck Smith's presence. We're never sure how long that's going to last. It could be a 1-year deal. It could be multiple years, but we don't really have a good handle on that. And boy, do the Ravens need big years out of that, because there's a relatively limited number of Ravens who will give upside surprises in my opinion. There's a relatively few high variance, high probability of a really great season that we didn't see coming.
Yeah, I think we see that pretty much exactly the same way.
All right, that's it. Well, let's move on to Patrick Mekari in that case. 26 years old on 8/13. It feels like he should be older than that. He's been in the league for a while. It's his 5th season. He'll be an unrestricted free agent not until after 24. It seems like the whole Ravens team is a UFA after 23. It's actually very scary in terms of just how much of their talent will be leaving after the 23 season. And it's already leading to a lot of unhappy people who want extensions who can't get them.
Yeah, it's if we're talking about what the future of this team looks like, I mean, there's so much riding on this year, but I think
Mhm.
yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see the Ravens taking the jump on the void years when it came to Beckham, something that they avoided doing prior. So the Ravens have definitely altered their cap management approach a bit as they head into this season, and it's going to make it rocky as it comes up. But yeah, it also does seem like Patrick Mekari has been, he's not the same kind of, if you want to call it the trump card of the ace of spades when it comes to Marshall Yanda in terms of
Mhm.
his overall performance, but his ability to be, I guess we'll liken it more to like Uno, his ability to be the wild card and to be
Yeah.
played in any situation, maybe not in the best of circumstances, but his ability to be played everywhere does make it just feel like he's been around a long time.
Yeah, he's been he's been above the replacement level as a fill-in whenever he's done that. And even last year where he didn't have a particular good year at tackle, and I want to go into that a little bit. And it's a difference there's a difference in the way PFF and I have scored things here that I want to get down to the heart of, because it doesn't make any sense. And when I looked at Mekari's individual games, generally they're scoring it the same way, but it looks like our weightings are different. That they score him extremely favorably, and I'm just shaking my head at the results week after week, the results for the season, because I get different numbers. But it's actually interesting to look at him versus Stanley, and we'll do that in just a second. But you're absolutely right about the trump card availability. It's hard to really put a value on that because the Ravens love that continuity on the offensive line so much that is really fueled by the ability to make a one-for-one change. So if Linderbaum were to go down for some reason, then you'd want to have one guy, whether it's Mekari or Mustipher, go in and replace him. If a guard goes down, you want the same thing. You want to have another guard ready to go. You don't want to have to move a tackle to guard and rotate three people and move your center to guard or whatever it might be. And when you have your left tackle go down, which hopefully doesn't happen, you better not have to rearrange everybody, like Moses to from right tackle to left tackle, and then Cleveland from left guard to right tackle, and then a new left guard. And I mean, something like that is a nightmare for continuity on your offensive line. So Mekari playing left tackle at a lower level is often the best possible answer in terms of continuity of the line.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes Mekari a fascinating player for this conversation, and I will obviously talk about what his expectations are. But it begs the question, if he's the best guy to play at left guard, but that somebody's going to get hurt and you don't want anybody to get hurt. I'm not saying anybody is predestined or injury prone or anything like that, but this is just the nature of the game. You're very unlikely to go 16, 17 weeks now without seeing any injury on the offensive line. Are you better off, like you said, then starting the musical chairs because you've got Mekari in one place, and whatever that looks like? Or is it just a 1-to-1 switch? If Mekari is the next guy in at every single other position, which he could be, in that sense that he's the next guy up at every single other spot. And so then all you're doing is moving in Simpson or Cleveland or take your pick of, it seems like the Ravens have 100 guys trying out for left guard this year, but take your pick of whoever the guy is that ends up being the guy that slots in there. And then Mekari just moves to the next spot. That doesn't feel like a lot too much shuffling or over shuffling in that sense. So, whether or not they're really giving Mekari a look for that shot, a look at left guard to start him there, or whether or not they want to use him as that utility extra man is interesting to me.
Yeah, I honestly, I think there's multiple reasons not to have Mekari take that left guard position. One is his size is not ideal in terms of length in particular, and I think you get the risk that having two smaller men playing left guard and center, in particular in terms of length, is going to cause the Ravens A gap to get bombed there in a way that I think will reduce Linderbaum's effectiveness. So you probably will have problems that accrue from that. That might be true no matter who they put at left guard, because no matter who they put out there is not going to be as good a pass blocker as Ben Powers was. Ben Powers was one of the best pass blocking guards in the entire league last year. So they're automatically kind of taking a step back. They're also going to pass the ball more. It's going to be a very challenging season for Linderbaum for that reason, to have another man. But I think at the very least, a very large man, 6'4", 320 and up, and good length. And so that's what differentiates Simpson from Mekari. Will give you a chance to do well. And obviously, if it's Cleveland or if it's Falele, in there, you're talking about enormous, gigantic men who conceivably work very well on combination blocks with a quick center like Linderbaum. And Linderbaum then ideally can be the guy to climb a lot of the time after he unbalances the player who Cleveland is blocking or who Zeitler is blocking on either side. All right. I did want to talk. It seems like we might have some lag.
Yeah, no, it'll be. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, whether or not the Ravens prioritize size. I think we will know a lot more, and we know a little bit based on what we're hearing from some of the players right now about what Muckin's system is supposed to do. But their selection of who that player ends up being, I think, could be telling about what we're going to see from the Ravens offense once we hit week 1.
Right. We'll do a little bit of comparative scoring. And this is where I just don't get it in terms of what PFF is doing. But if I look at two players, if I look at Mekari and I look at Ronnie Stanley, PFF would tell you that in terms of pass blocking, Mekari was a little bit ahead of Stanley. And he might have even been a little bit ahead in terms of run blocking as well. But just ahead in pass blocking had me really surprised enough that I was, befuddled by it. Let's put it that way. But I did address this by each element of scoring that I have, and that includes 6 things: missed blocks, pressures, quarterback hits, sacks, penalties, and penetrations. Everything else is a made block, so it doesn't fall into one of those categories. So all these are downgrades. So I looked at the two players, and for the year, Mekari's got an 80.3 pass blocking score and a 62 run blocking score. And then if you look at a player like Stanley, I think he's actually lower in both. And it just didn't make any sense to me. But I'm going to go through this in just a second. And he had 82 and 54 for Ronnie Stanley. So he's actually a slightly better pass blocker and a worse run blocker. So they're similar in total. All right. Now I looked at these all on a per snap basis, and these directly relate to points in my system. So there's no unhidden component. It's all translatable directly to the decimal score I give people. Missed blocks, their missed block percentages were differ by 0.01. That's literally 0.01 in terms of the weekly rate that I would give the player, weekly grade that I give the player in terms of grading all their individual blocks and setting it out. For the year, Ronnie Stanley 0.75 by my system, Mekari 0.64 at tackle. So there's a big difference between these two. Ronnie's year is about a B minus year maybe, and Mekari's year is about a D plus year. So I see there's a big difference between the two, and PFF says otherwise. I look at pressures. Pressure rate for Ronnie Stanley was about 2.5% different on a per snap basis. So that's 0.025 points as that works out. Quarterback hits were different by almost 2%. And again, 0.02 directly to the bottom line. Sacks were exactly the same in terms of a percentage rate. Penalties is a huge one. Mekari was penalized 3 times for holding last year in a relatively low number of snaps. Stanley penalized only 1 time the whole year, and about 1/6 as often or a 1/5 as often for the year. So about a 4.2 point difference there. I'm sorry, that's right. That's on penalties. And then penetrations, Stanley allowed fewer as well, to about another 0.01 in terms of grades. So between all those items, that explains the difference of 11 points. I just don't get it. I don't understand how PFF is scoring it so differently, because usually I look at this on a week-by-week basis and their numbers are similar. So it's all in terms of their weightings are just very different from mine. But even so, when Stanley is better at every single element, I just don't get it. I don't get how they would end up grading Patrick Mekari higher. But it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, PFF is one of those funny ones to me because you don't get insights into what they're doing. It does seem like they have like whatever they're telling somebody else to, they're looking for specific things, and so we don't know what those keys are. So it makes it hard to identify it. What I saw from Ronnie Stanley last year. Look, if we get, I know we're talking about Patrick Mekari's expectations here, but if we get vintage. We get vintage Ronnie Stanley, or even 85% of what Ronnie Stanley that we've seen him at his peak was, then this is going to be a very good season for the Baltimore Ravens. In a Ted Monken style offense, for the spread that we're talking about, for Lamar to be able to do some of these things. It's just silly that a system couldn't find its way, especially in a year where Ronnie Stanley, it's not like he played poorly. We also just didn't see Mekari pop on tape when he was playing tackle either. So I agree with everything you're saying in terms of that regard. But hopefully we don't see any tackle play for Patrick Mekari this upcoming year. And that's a win-win scenario for everybody involved here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if Patrick Mekari had asked, was asked right now, would you rather play not at all because the Ravens line continuity was good across the board? I hope he wouldn't hesitate with the answer and would just say yes to it, because his versatility, I think, would still be valued to the Ravens next year in terms of keeping him around, because he's bailed them out so many times in the past.
And I think his answer in that situation would be, if anything, yes, and hoping that I won the left guard competition by playing exceptionally well and earned a starting role. That's a potential option for him to be able to say that and still be a team player, right? If that's the question that's been asked of him.
Yeah, there you go. That's not unreasonable and probably unlikely, but not completely unreasonable. The Ravens are trying out certainly a lot of people there. Let me ask you this, and this is kind of a thought experiment question. By the way, one thing I found out is message boards and Twitter are the worst place for thought experiment questions. You really got to know who you're talking to ask a thought experiment question. So one thing I asked was about the Orioles. If you could have all of the following, would you give up Jackson Holliday? And the things were: Steve Bisciotti buys the Orioles from Angelos. They apply the same cap management philosophy with regard to being smart with money, but not being cheap with money that the Ravens have. They sign a 40-year lease in Baltimore. And there was one other thing, I forget what it was, but it was related to the team staying in Baltimore or staying competitive. It didn't have anything to do with getting a player in return. You get no player in return. And of course, everybody's saying, well, what player do we get in return? Who are we trading him to? And that is a legitimate question. He's not going to a divisional rival. You have to say that. But thought experiment questions, my God, the responses people come up with, they say, that's stupid. No, it's not stupid. It's just a thought experiment. Come on. So here's the thought experiment for you, because I know you're capable of this. So you can have Ronnie Stanley for 15 games, actually for 14 games, I'll say, at the level he played, half the distance between the level he played in 2019 and where he played last year. Okay, so it's an improvement on where he played last year, but it's not quite up to his all-pro season. And that's maybe getting him back to 85, 90% of the player he was. Or you can have him for all 17 games, but he plays like he did this last year. Which do you prefer, knowing you have to find 3 games for another left tackle if you take the first one?
Assuming that it's not the latter part of the weeks 15. How many weeks are there in the season now? Week 16, 17, and 18 of the season that he's missing, and is at risk for playoff injury exposure. I more than happily take the lesser amount of games for the higher quality performance, and it's not particularly close for me.
Okay, I think that's a legitimate question to the thought experiment: is do we get him for the playoffs? I left that unsaid, and it's maybe the most important question of all: is he around for the playoffs or not? But I think that's a valid point. I think that's the way I'd go to, but it's really hard to say that, because I think what he did last year was good enough, and it'd be magnified over more snaps and more pass blocking snaps in particular this year with Monken. And I do think he'll improve some, but even if he didn't, I think it'd be good enough to get the Ravens through, and just taking off the huge variance from having a risk of Ronnie Stanley injured is a really nice thing to have. Now, we already took some of that off the board by saying, it's only going to be 3 games he misses. But anyway.
Well, I also wonder whether or not Monken's new system is going to play a part in the results of what we see from this team, right? So like making it, part of injuries are random things happening, a lot of bodies piled up in similar places, guys running cross directions at the same time and being pushed into or rolled up on, etc. In those situations, asking wide receivers to be blockers in situations sit consistently where they're blocking bigger, stronger, more athletic guys. I mean, I was disappointed in what we got from the Ravens last year and Greg Roman. And I'm not saying that there's huge risks there's tangibly more risk in a Greg Roman style offense for the players, but I expect Lamar Jackson to be healthier in a Monken style offense. And I think that there's an opportunity for the offensive line to be healthier in that situation because there's just less of a burden and attacks and less bodies. That like Greg Roman had everybody in the box all the time and running in crisscross directions, and there were guys at everybody's feet all the time. And anytime you saw anybody go down because someone was rolling around on the ground, we were all worried, right? And so if you're going to be 4 wide and you're going to be spread out, it's just going to be less physical, and hopefully as a result of that, potentially less injuries.
Okay, that's a very interesting point, and I wonder if you get that, if you have less intrusion into the pocket that leads to falling on the back of legs. That's kind of the way I'm picking up on your thought. I see that often as somebody penetrates through a gap and a guard or tackle usually pushes that guy across the pocket to block him, which is like, it's the worst kind of thing. I think, they're probably taught tackle the guy if you have to. And in a lot of cases, tackling would probably be better, taking the holding call than taking the injury risk that's attendant with blocking somebody across the pocket. But I think you might well be right that, you definitely have more chance for feet to get tangled when you pull as much with Roman. And I think it's a very valid point.
Yeah, the fullback and the tight end motion in parts, and the keys and the way the defenders were asked to attack Ravens backs and edge offensive linemen in particular, in the style of which Greg Roman did it, was forcibly aggressive, and there was no way around that. And the Ravens never took advantage of teams trying to do that against them. Instead of trying to adjust and do something in response to that, they just tried to do what they did better, and stronger and more aggressive back in their face. And so my biggest hope about the Todd Monken offense is that they set something up, and maybe that is that aggression, running the ball, etc., early, but the progression of that is to take advantage behind whatever that is, and not to just try and be better at what you're doing than what they're doing, but take advantage of what they're doing, key on it, and attack behind it. And hopefully, as a result of that, we see less wear and tear potentially coming as a result of that.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. I agree. All right, so we talked a little bit about whether or not Mekari should be part of the guard competition. Do you want to take a pro? Would you take a pro or con stance on that? Do you think in the end, would you want to be part of the initial guard competition, or do you want him kind of left out and saved as a 1-for-1 replacement?
I would say it's a gigantic meh. I would say throw him in there, right? Because if everybody else really underperforms and Mekari is the only guy that looks like he's capable of playing left guard, there is not a doubt in my mind that he should play left guard then, right? But I think that, in this particular thought experiment, I would say getting him out of the competition early, if it looks like he's not the favorite, or if somebody or a couple guys are playing at, like if there are 2 guys playing at the same level, or one guy playing significantly better than Mekari, in both of those circumstances, I would then want the Ravens to start moving around on the line, getting him prepared mentally to be kind of that sixth man on the offensive line, and making sure that was the approach that everybody was clear on that approach early.
Okay. There is a player that I think, maybe there's a couple, that their success at other positions may directly, indirectly affect Mekari. And the first one is Ben Cleveland, because they've tried him out at right tackle some. Now, I don't know if that's going to continue, but I would expect he's going to get some preseason game action at right tackle. That's what I'll predict for you. And the other one who is really interesting at this point is John Simpson. Simpson is ideally sized for a guard, has terrific length at 6'4", 321 and 34 1/8 inch arms. I am always tempted when you see arm length like that to also test the feet that go with them and say, is that guy a possible left tackle? Because the Ravens don't have anybody else who meets the combination of length and feet to play left tackle. Fa'alele, we already kind of proved last year, is not the guy. Morgan Moses, they had chances. They never moved him there. He hasn't played left tackle in a long time. He's also terrific at right tackle, but you know, if you need a left tackle, you need a left tackle. And then Mekari ends up being the best guy you've got, and you're making do with that, with him and a player who doesn't have the requisite length for the position, and it shows in terms of the on-field results. And I've got to ask, is John Simpson a possibility to play left tackle on this team? Because there does not seem to be anyone else who's even a possibility right now. And it's unusual that the Ravens would go into a season that unprepared for, injuries at that position.
Yeah, it's the Ravens' approach to some, I'd say, tackle, cornerback, and outside linebacker are fundamentally different than they have been in some of the historical seasons of what we've seen from the Ravens. And so a guy like Patrick Mekari is really interesting in that regard, where, and Simpson alike, about, there must be some expectation that they can cover some of those spots. I think I also wonder whether it's like one of those situations where, you look at what the Rams did, and the Ravens aren't doing it at the same level the Rams are, where they're saying, okay, we're going with 3 bona fide top shelf superstars, right? And that's what we're building this team around, and we're going to trade everything and anything around it to win in that circumstance. But they are saying, look, these guys have got to play, and if we're going to win the Super Bowl, it's going to be with these guys. And whether we sign the 34th best guy to be their backup and eat up cap space, and versus just hoping Stanley's okay and going with it, and that's how we're making a meaningful playoff run. And if we don't get there, we'll try and make it work. But that's just not the year then, right? It has a little bit of that feel to it, right? Like that Owe and Ajabo, one of them is going to rise to the occasion and really step up this year. That Rocky Sin and one of these random slot guys are going to come through and play there. That Hamilton and Williams are going to stay healthy at safety. I mean, we have been spoiled as Ravens fans at the amount of depth that the Ravens keep on their team. Right. It's part of why this team is always consistently good and right around the playoff mix, but never the, other than 2019, never kind of the lead horse in the stable kind of thing. The Ravens seem to really have leaned into the opposite of that this year a bit, or maybe not leaned into it, but just not been traditional in what we've seen from them. And so I think this is an example where Mekari is an amazing X factor to say, hey, that's going to be our approach. If we got to throw him out there and move him around, and then a guy like Simpson, we're going to do that. We're going to hope we get by with it, and we're not going to worry about it. And we're going to let Lamar be Lamar and carry us through those situations.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And they definitely are playing without a net at several positions. There's no doubt about it. And I don't know what they're going to do at corner. The Marcus Peters signing is today. It's kind of a little bit depressing to me because the Ravens are so short at outside corner. You're not bothered by it? I couldn't tell from that reaction.
Oh, sorry. No, I was very depressed by it as well. I thought that he was a guy, like, especially at the number. I mean, I don't know if Peters demanded to be a starter, and the Ravens weren't willing to acquiesce to that, and that was the reason they couldn't come to terms. It just doesn't make any sense, though. And at that price tag, that was worth bringing him back, in my opinion. And it's not a bad locker room guy. I mean, maybe he is a bad locker room guy. Who knows? But I was disappointed.
Yeah, the good news is with the Ravens, you don't always hear about who the bad locker room guy is. They'll occasionally reprimand players, but they do a very good job of keeping problems in-house. The player has to really want to air his grievances publicly to let that get out.
And Peters has been jettisoned from a number of places in his career for being allegedly, or for reasons that don't make any sense based on his performance on the field. So very much perhaps the Ravens it wasn't the right fit in that regard, and we all went our separate ways, and maybe we're better for it. Who knows?
Yeah, I guess it's possible. It seemed like this was such a great place and such an ideal defensive fit for him, given the Ravens like to scheme up for pressure, and Peters knows how to play off that. Yeah. The Ravens like to kind of play cover 3, and Peters certifiably knows how to take advantage of that. And didn't have a great year last year, but I kind of feel like that's exactly where he was with the Rams when the Ravens traded him, and that same season he became All-Pro. He was playing the worst ball of his career, and before he left the Rams, so it might have been the Rams that were the problem. Yep. There. All right.
Yep.
Let's move on a little bit and talk about what's a good and a great season for Patrick Mekari. So, what does a good season look like to you?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. When I was thinking about it, a good season, I think, is Mekari starting in 6 games, and playing, at average or a little bit above average or better, and at whatever position he is asked to start in those 6 games.
Okay. I have the threshold a little lower because I think it'd certainly be good for the Ravens. It's hard for me to say whether it's good for Mekari or not, but I agree. It's a difficult one to gauge in anywhere close because you have to kind of project what are the injury realities are like. I say he's ready as a backup tackle or center for inevitable injuries. He sees less than 150 to 250 snaps and delivers slightly lower than the league average level. He didn't quite do that last year. I want a slight upgrade of that in terms of how he looks as a blocker, since I project that I suspect he's going to come in as a backup tackle and not a backup center.
Yep. I mean, all that makes sense. And that's, your alignment of number of snaps, mine is a little bit less than that. A great season to me is less Mekari, at a higher level performance when needed, but it's less of him. Especially, and I think we both agree, we don't view him as the favorite for left guard. We don't view him as some elite contributor at left guard. Certainly, I think we both have not talked about him as though he will be average or below average if he were asked to play that position. But from a replacement level perspective, it certainly feels like that could be replaced. So needing him for those 2 or 3 games or parts of 2 or 3 games to come in, cover, patch things over, be really good in those situations, and that's what we see from him for the year. That's my the glory of being an offensive lineman in some instances is there aren't a lot of statistics that are attributed to you, and hearing less about you is also often when you've done better. And I think that, in this case, that's what I would want to see from Mekari, which is, not a negative or a fault of his, but, it's going to mean really good things for the Ravens in particular if we only see him in 2 games this year.
Yeah, I agree. It kind of sounds like, the first prize is a 1-week trip to Cleveland, and second prize is no trip to Cleveland. Or sorry, other way around, right? Second prize is a 1-week trip.
Or either way, right?
The first prize is none.
It can go either way on that one. It doesn't matter. I'm not participating in that competition.
That's okay. Well, we kind of know what it means on a Baltimore show anyway. I'll talk about a great season for Patrick Mekari for me. I think he takes a step forward wherever he plays in terms of his per snap productivity. And he's available as the option at any of the 5 offensive line spots break down due to injury or ineffectiveness, which is a possibility at left guard. They might have 2 guys that both flunk out, and they say, you know what, Mekari's still available. Let's stick him in there. He plays 350 plus snaps at or above the league average, which I think would be absolutely tremendous if he were at the league average, honestly. And he's lauded as one of the unsung heroes that saves the Ravens playoff push. So the Ravens line is about to play. They find Patrick Mekari, they put him in. We talk about him the way we talk about LJ Fort and Josh Bynes 2019 saving the Ravens season defensively. Or we talk about them the way, maybe in more hushed tones, we talk about Domata Pecco and Jelly Ellis coming in and saving the defensive line that season. But not necessarily like Marcus Peters, because Marcus Peters was a flashy All-Pro player who came in and changed things very very distinctly. But I think Bynes and Fort are the maybe the best possible examples of that's what the kind of performance we would need from Patrick Mekari to save this offensive line's continuity.
Yeah, it's always interesting to try and identify what you would call a player that is not a list starter. And like, I'm not even talking Pro Bowl or All Pro, but just like a bona fide, like if this guy is on any team, he's very likely to be starting kind of player, right? Like that doesn't necessarily, Patrick Queen probably falls into this group of players where like, I don't think he's a Pro Bowl quality player, but I think if Patrick Queen is on nearly any team in the NFL, he's starting, right? How do you take a guy that is the level below that and define what is great for that guy, right? Because I think when I hear what you were saying, I think those are much loftier expectations. 350 snaps from Patrick Mekari, at above or at league average or above it over the course of this year would really, that would be great. I think it would be a lot more than great. And hopefully, hopefully it's not a situation that the Ravens need to see that, but it's one of those things where it's like, if he is if our expectation of him is that he's going to get a B- or a C+ in the class and he gets a B+, that's great to me from that level of player on that number of quality of importance in the Ravens roster to start the year. Right.
Yeah. And I guess I'm very, I'm not grading on the curve here. I'm saying you hope for a C+ season out of Mekari in 350 snaps at some position where you didn't know you were going to need him. And so I agree. I think I still agree with you that it's higher than the 80th percentile. I just want to have some significant differentiation between my two. And I admit there's not all these exactly being 60th and 80th percentile, but it is what it is.
There's some hair splitting going on here in what I'm saying too.
It's always fun to talk about these things with you, Jordan. A very intelligent football conversation. One of the really great analysts out there. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
Yeah, you guys can find. Well, is it Twitter? Is it X? What do we call it these days? But
whatever.
Whatever the platform that Elon Musk owns currently, you can find me there at Raven Sit Room. We've also got a podcast on Filmstudy as well. We're hoping to get that revved up for this year with my co-host Gabe Ferguson. He's at Gabe Ferky over in the same place, and we're hoping to be able to take that same approach of trying to look at situationally where to key in when you're watching Ravens games, what to look for, what you saw in the last week, and maybe trying to add in some other fun things to come.
Gabe and Jordan both are people who are on multiple shows during the year for the offense and defense. Some of the best analysts out there, and really always appreciate talking football with them. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study short, you still got time. We can get you in during the year. We can get you in during the time between the last preseason game and the beginning of the season. We have lots of opportunities. Give me a DM on Twitter. I'll get right back to you. We've got another idea coming up tomorrow that I'm doing a show on about blue chip players that I'm really looking forward to. And if other folks out there have ideas, it's the topic can be anything you like. And just hit me up. I'll get right back to you. Jordan, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.